Hey guys, tonight we slip through a warped little crack in history's floorboards and find ourselves in the shadowy bedrooms and hay-strewn huts of medieval Europe. Listen, the night is thick with fog, not a whisper of streetlight anywhere, just the faint glow of a candle guttering on a wooden table. You're lying on a creaky straw mattress, every sound amplified, the distant howl of something not quite dog, not quite anything you want to meet, the gentle scuttle of a mouse in the rafters, the uneven breathing of someone, maybe family, maybe a stranger, sharing your room. The air's chilly and you feel a heaviness, a certain weight that's more than the old wool blanket or the stones in your pocket you swore would keep ghosts away. Because here, the darkness is alive with things you can't explain and, if the tales are true, probably don't want to meet. Reality check. You probably won't survive this world without at least a few new superstitions clinging to your every move. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. I promise no medieval spirits will show up. Well, probably. No, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fire's gone out. You can practically taste the night air, heavy with damp and the faint scent of something burning far off. You're not alone. Not just because everyone slept together in those days, sometimes with livestock curled up nearby, but because medieval folk believed the darkness was thick with invisible guests. Good spirits, bad spirits, ancestor ghosts, imps, wandering souls who'd missed their chance at heaven or hell, all crowding in for a better look. If you've ever felt watched as you drift off, medieval people would have called that Tuesday. So, you glance around your little room, or maybe just your side of the common sleeping hall, and try not to make eye contact with the weird shadow near the corner. People in this era have rules about not looking too hard at certain shapes after midnight. Historians still argue whether this caution came from pagan roots, church warnings, or simply the universal desire to not absolutely terrify yourself before bedtime. And here's a mainstream fact. Sleep wasn't seen as just a biological necessity, but a perilous journey you undertook each night. Many believed your soul actually left your body as you slept, travelling elsewhere, sometimes to heaven, sometimes to the devil's doorstep. That's why, if you startled awake, you might mutter a quick prayer, hoping your soul could find its way home. One misplaced word, one ill-timed cough, and who knows what might sneak in with you when you return. Quirky detail, a popular charm to keep spirits out, involved sewing dried toad bones into your pillow or hanging a bundle of garlic above the bed. Was it effective? If you're brave enough to try, let me know how it goes, but maybe check with your roommate first. The logic was that evil spirits, especially those with a penchant for causing nightmares, hated certain smells and symbols. So if you think your breath is bad in the morning, just remember it's historically protective. Let's say you have a guest tonight, someone older, grizzled, with stories to make your hair stand on end. They whisper about the mare, a malicious spirit that sits on your chest while you sleep, squeezing out your breath, paralyzing you with terror. That's where the word nightmare comes from. But this is no metaphor. People really believed a supernatural being was squatting on their ribs. If you woke up breathless and unable to move, you didn't call the doctor. You called the priest or your grandmother, who might be scarier than any demon. Of course, not all spirits were malevolent. There were kindly ancestors who'd come check on you, or gentle house spirits who liked to tidy up, so long as you left them a crust of bread or a thimble of ale. Ignore them, and well, maybe your shoes go missing or your butter curdles for no reason. Historians still argue whether these beliefs came from Celtic traditions, Roman imports, or just the universal human instinct to blame lost socks on invisible creatures. As you drift further into this world, imagine being a medieval parent. Your children whimper in their sleep. Do you comfort them, or do you sprinkle salt across their bed just in case something is lurking? One account from rural England has a mother tucking a silver spoon into her baby's blanket every night, believing it kept fairies from snatching the child away. Yes, silverware was the original anti-fairy technology. Modern debate continues over whether such practices actually comforted parents or just gave them more to worry about. You try to sleep, but someone in the house snores. A deep, rattling rumble. A good sign, some say. Loud snores meant your soul was firmly anchored. But if you slept silently, barely breathing, there were whispers about souls easily slipping out, never quite returning. Imagine the pressure, every breath you take in the night being a kind of cosmic tug-of-war.
The walls creak, the wind howls. If you're lying on your back, beware the preferred position for ghostly visitations. Side sleeping was safer, according to a monk's old scribbled note, though it could lead to melancholy vapours.
Modern science calls that sleep apnea, but in medieval times everything needed a spirit or demon to explain it. Joke's on you if you thought medieval medicine had your back. They were more likely to recommend hanging a herring above your door than actually treating your sleep disorder.
You shift under your blanket.
There's a chill on your toes. No matter how many layers you pile on, the draft finds you. That's just the spirits passing through, your uncle says, grinning in the dim candlelight. You roll your eyes, but tonight you pull the blanket up anyway, just in case. Candles flicker out, shadows on the wall start to move. Remember that toad bone pillow? Someone down the street swears by it. The apothecary sells out of dried toads every winter, making a tidy profit off of anxious sleepers. Is it medicine or just medieval marketing genius? Historians still argue over where folk magic ended and entrepreneurship began. Now there's a soft tap at the window. The family dog probably. But in some villages, a knock at midnight meant a wandering soul begging to be let in. Ignore it, and you might hear scratching all night. Open the window and, well, who knows what you've just invited in? Superstitions bred etiquette. Always keep your windows latched, but a bowl of milk on the sill couldn't hurt. You might feel silly, tucked in and clutching a sprig of rosemary or a chunk of iron, but remember, people once believed these small acts kept them safe from a host of invisible dangers. Even today, we all have rituals. A glass of water on the nightstand, a favourite pillow, checking the locks twice. Maybe superstition never really sleeps. At last the house falls quiet. Outside, the stars spin overhead, ancient and indifferent, but inside you listen to the hush, the steady breathing of your companions, the occasional muttered prayer. You wonder what tomorrow will bring, and whether you'll remember your dreams or if, as some feared, a part of you will stay wandering out there in the deep, mysterious night. The hours slip past. Now you're inching closer to what people once dreaded most, the witching hour. Midnight is bad enough, but everyone knows the real trouble starts when the clock drags itself past 3. Out in the countryside, a rooster crows too early, and sends shivers up your spine, because in medieval times, nothing good happened when time stood still in the dead of night. The house feels different at this hour. The air is colder, heavier, and even the candlelight seems hesitant. You can almost hear the whispers. Sometimes it's just the wind, but tonight you can't shake the feeling that something's waiting just beyond the circle of warmth from your little hearth. In your own life, 3 in the morning is just the hour for regretting emails and questionable snacks, but back then, this was the hour of supernatural danger. People believed that at 3 o'clock, the boundary between worlds thinned, and whatever lurked on the other side could slip through.
Why 3?
Well, it's a number laced with religious symbolism. A sly inversion of the Holy Trinity, or so the preachers warned. The devil loved to mock sacred things, so he made his move at the unholiest hour. Historians still argue whether this particular superstition started as church propaganda or simply an observation, that everything feels spookier when you're half asleep and the moon is hiding. Either way, most people tried their best to be asleep well before the dreaded hour arrived. If you're unlucky enough to wake up, you lie there frozen, straining to hear any sign that something's amiss. A door creaks, your heart pounds. It's only your little sister tossing in her sleep, but you still reach for that clove of garlic tucked under your pillow, just to be safe. In medieval houses, even the bravest knights sometimes clutched charms or recited prayers at this hour. Imagine your toughest warrior in full chainmail, sweating in fear over a squeaky floorboard. Who's laughing now? This time of night birthed all sorts of odd behaviours. Some people, desperate for sleep, insisted on sleeping in a circle, their feet together, to prevent evil from sneaking in between them. Others arranged shoes by the door in a very particular way, or placed a broomstick across the threshold, because everyone knew a wandering spirit would be forced to count every single bristle before it could cross. Quirky? Absolutely. But if it helped you drift back to sleep, who's judging? If you lived near a church, you might find comfort in the soft, distant tolling of bells. Many believed the sound could drive away evil or mark safe passage for souls caught in limbo. Bells became the medieval equivalent of a nightlight, except instead of batteries you had burly monks in drafty towers bringing out the darkness. Fun fact, in some villages, the ringing was so constant that it doubled as a midnight curfew, nudging stragglers home before the spirits got too bold. But the witching hour also inspired a peculiar kind of solidarity.
Neighbours who might squabble by day would trade protective charms or watch each other's doors at night.
Sometimes whole families took turns stoking the fire, convinced that letting the flames die out at 3 would invite calamity. Historians still argue if this watch and wait system built stronger communities, or just kept everyone awake and cranky. And then there are the sleep strategies. Want to avoid waking up at 3? Drink a mug of warm ale and mumble an old rhyme before bed. The rhyme changed from place to place. Some involved naming every saint you could recall. Others featured livestock or questionable vegetables. One German remedy called for sleeping with a cabbage leaf tucked under your hat. You do you, medieval Germany. Every now and then, someone would ignore all the warnings and wander outside during the witching hour. Maybe a shepherd tending a lamb, or a baker sneaking out to check the ovens. If they returned, you'd press them for stories. Did they see anything strange? Feel a sudden chill? Some claimed they glimpsed will-o'-the-wisps, flickering lights said to lead the foolish to their doom. Was it swamp gas, or something far more sinister? To this day, scholars debate whether these sightings were mass hallucinations, rare weather phenomena, or simply what happens when you mix insomnia and a strong ale. There's a joke here somewhere about the length people will go to for a good night's sleep. Maybe it's the image of a grizzled farmer tiptoeing through the house at 3:01 a.m, clutching his broomstick and cursing the rooster.
Or perhaps it's the absolute certainty with which your grandmother would tell you that if you so much as yawned at the wrong moment, you'd wake up with your face turned the wrong way forever. You can laugh now, but tonight you'll be glancing at the clock all the same. Mainstream historical fact. The notion of a witching hour persists even today, though now it's more likely to show up in horror movies than in church sermons. In the Middle Ages, the danger felt real enough to inspire architecture, thick doors, tiny windows, communal sleeping, and even the scheduling of night watchmen. Quirky detail. The fear was so deep that some families actually slept in shifts, assigning one unlucky soul to keep vigil through the worst hours. Their payment? Usually an extra crust of bread, maybe some dubious ale, and the right to gossip about any strange sights for weeks. So the next time you wake up at 3 in the morning, remember you're part of a long tradition. You're lying there, heart thudding, listening to the quiet, and wondering what's real and what's just the imagination running wild. In a world without streetlights or smartphones, the darkness was its own kind of magic.
equal parts terror and comfort. You roll over, pull the blanket tighter, and wait for the sky to pale and the birds to sing. If you survive the witching hour, you've earned your rest until tomorrow night, when the cycle begins again. But don't worry, as you'll see, people in the Middle Ages had all sorts of tricks to keep the darkness at bay. Some worked, some didn't, but all of them added a little extra flavour to the strange soup of medieval sleep. And if you ever find yourself counting the minutes until dawn, you're in excellent company. Across centuries and continents, people have stared up at the same darkness, whispered the same prayers, and hoped for morning's light to chase away whatever the night might bring. You're finally dozing off when it happens, a dream vivid and strange, pulling you from the edge of sleep into an entirely different world. In medieval Europe, dreams weren't just random brain static, or the consequence of eating that questionable sheep's cheese. They were messages, prophecies, warnings, or even secret tests from the powers that ruled over your life, both seen and unseen.
Your dreams might mean everything, or absolutely nothing. And naturally, everyone around you was convinced they were an expert dream interpreter.
Picture this. You wake up in a cold sweat after dreaming about your teeth falling out. Instantly, you're in for a day of worry. Was that a sign of coming death? Some would say yes. Losing teeth meant a family member might soon pass. Others whispered that it signaled lost fortune or betrayal. Either way, you probably don't start your morning feeling refreshed. Mainstream historical fact. For much of the Middle Ages, dream interpretation was serious business, blending folk tradition with bits of Greco-Roman philosophy and Christian doctrine. Books like the Dream Book of Daniel or treatises by early church writers were circulated in monastic libraries, promising answers to every nocturnal riddle. Yet, for every learned monk with an opinion, there was a village wise woman ready with her own, often wilder, explanation. But let's be honest, most dreams weren't grand prophecies. They were weird, cryptic, and often downright embarrassing. Imagine explaining to your neighbours why you dreamt you were chased by a giant chicken, or suddenly flying over the village in your nightshirt. Scholars still argue whether people really remembered their dreams differently back then, or if medieval pillow talk was just that wild. Either way, everyone felt the pressure to find meaning, because a dream ignored was an omen wasted. You shuffle through your day, replaying your dream, and eventually someone notices. You look troubled, says the baker, as you collect your morning loaf. Did you see a black dog in your sleep? He asks, peering at you over the counter. In many places, dreaming of dogs, especially black ones, was bad news. It could mean sickness, an enemy plotting against you, or simply that you had fleas, which, let's face it, was always a possibility. Of course, not every dream spelled doom. Sometimes visions of gardens or flowing water were seen as signs of prosperity or spiritual favour. If you dreamt of fire, interpretations varied. In some regions, fire foretold love. In others, it predicted disaster. If you dreamed you were naked in public, well, that usually meant embarrassment awaited, unless you spun it as a warning from God to live a more modest life. Medieval society was nothing if not flexible with its metaphors. For the average medieval sleeper, though, the real trouble began when dreams turned dark. Nightmares, those terrifying, heart-pounding visions, weren't just personal bad luck. They were seen as literal attacks by demons, witches, or restless spirits. A nightmare might be evidence that someone had cursed you, or that your soul was under spiritual assault. And so the village priest, the herbalist, and even the grumpy neighbour with the largest onion patch all had advice on what to do next. Sometimes you'd be told to sleep with a psalm written on parchment under your pillow. Sometimes you'd burn the offending bed straw or rub holy water into the cracks of your walls. Quirky detail, in some areas people believed that if you dreamt of your own death, you needed to spit on the ground 3 times before sunrise to break the curse. And here's a little joke for you. What did medieval folks call a good dream? A miracle. A bad one. Tuesday, because when you're sleeping on a straw mattress next to 3 siblings and a goat, just making it to sunrise without a demonic visitation or embarrassing prophecy is something worth celebrating. But what about recurring dreams, the same symbols over and over like a wheel turning or a bridge crumbling? These were debated endlessly. Some said it meant you had a destiny to fulfill, others blamed indigestion. Historians still argue whether recurring dream motifs in the medieval period matched up with broader social anxieties like war, famine, or the never-ending threat of taxation. My personal theory? People just needed more comfortable pillows. Every village had its dream expert. Sometimes a priest, sometimes a layperson with a gift for storytelling. If you wanted to know what your dream meant, you brought bread or an egg in exchange for a reading. The results were often as ambiguous as a modern horoscope. You will meet someone unexpected. Change is coming. Watch out for red cows. Yet, people clung to these interpretations, weaving them into their daily lives and decisions. Imagine buying a new plough because you dreamt of broken wheels, or delaying a marriage because a wise woman said your fiancé's face turned into a fish in your dream. Yes, fish-faced fiancés were bad luck, unless you lived near the coast, where it could mean abundance.
Dreams, of course, weren't always left to the experts. Households had their own rituals for controlling them. Sleeping with your head facing east, tucking rosemary or bay leaves under your mattress, or reciting prayers for angelic protection.
For especially troubling nightmares, some even tried to pass on the dream by whispering it to a dog or even the family pig who, as legend had it, could absorb bad luck with a few snuffles and a sleepy tail wag. This is possibly the first recorded instance of emotional support animals. At the edges of the Christian world, older, pagan traditions clung on. Scandinavian sagas spoke of dream seers, while in the Slavic lands, old women brewed potions said to protect dreamers from wandering spirits. Was it superstition or proto-psychology? Scholars are still debating. So tonight, as you slip in and out of sleep, remember that your dreams are carrying you through a web of history and meaning. Whether you find yourself soaring above the rooftops, lost in a maze, or simply eating an endless bowl of porridge, you're in good company.
For centuries, sleepers have woken in confusion, muttered prayers, and quietly decided to interpret their dreams however best suited their hopes and fears.
And if your dreams tonight are especially strange, you might want to write them down in the morning, just in case some future historian finds your notebook and decides you are the wisest dream interpreter of them all. Now let's imagine you're ready to actually sleep after surviving spirits, the witching hour, and decoding your dreams, but you're not out of the woods yet. The very placement of your bed could determine whether you woke up healthy, cursed, or somewhere in between. If you thought picking a side of the bed was just about comfort, medieval superstition had news for you. Where your head rested was a matter of life-death and a bit of local real estate folklore. First things first, never, under any circumstances, should your feet point directly toward the door. This wasn't about awkward exits or drafty toes. People believed that laying with your feet facing the door mimicked the way corpses were positioned before being carried out for burial. It was called the death position, and as every grandmother from York to Prague insisted, tempting fate in this way was practically sending an RSVP to whatever spirits might be passing by. If you're feeling bold, you could try it, but don't blame anyone if your dreams get a little more crowded than usual tonight. Even more, bed placement often depended on which direction was deemed lucky. Mainstream historical fact. Many medieval folks tried to align their beds with their heads to the east, as the direction of the rising sun, the land of new beginnings, and crucially, the symbolic direction of paradise. Church altars pointed east, so why not your pillow? Some believed you'd be more likely to have peaceful dreams, or even visions sent by angels if your head pointed that way. If, on the other hand,
Your bed faced west. You might invite darkness or even death itself into your sleep. Historians still argue whether this habit came directly from Christian influence or if it piggybacked on much older sun worship rituals that got a medieval makeover. The placement of beds in a room wasn't just about direction, it was about proximity to the hearth for warmth, to the window for air, and definitely far from the drafty door. But watch out, some thought a bed too close to the window could let evil spirits drift in with the night breeze. There are even quirky local rules about not having your bed directly under a ceiling beam, especially if you're prone to nightmare. The logic was that heavy beams trapped bad dreams above your head, or worse, attracted mischievous spirits who might dangle from the rafters for their own entertainment. And here's a fringe tidbit you might enjoy. In certain parts of Eastern Europe, people built hidden spirit walls inside their homes, narrow partitions behind beds or altars to confuse wandering souls. The idea was that a spirit, eager to cause trouble, would get lost wandering the maze of false walls and leave you to your well-deserved rest. Medieval home design meets supernatural pest control. Let's not forget about what you slept on. Mattresses were usually stuffed with straw, hay, reeds, or if you were particularly fancy, feathers. There was a common belief that stuffing your mattress with particular plants could help or hinder your sleep. Lavender was widely praised for peace and protection, while mugwort was thought to bring vivid dreams, sometimes even prophetic ones. But be careful too much mugwort, and the stories warned you could invite madness or attract witches who follow the smell in search of secrets. Historians still debate whether the botanical law of sleep was more medical or magical, but either way, it certainly gave you something to think about as you made your bed each night. Beneath the bed was another hot spot for superstition. Never let your bed stand over a gap, such as a cellar or crawl space. Spirits, some believed, drifted up through cracks in the earth, drawn to warmth and dreaming humans. If your bed couldn't avoid being above empty space, a quick fix was to sprinkle a ring of salt around the legs or tuck an iron horseshoe beneath the mattress. It's possible this is where modern under-the-bed monster stories began, though now it's mostly dust bunnies and the occasional sock. If you travelled and slept in an unfamiliar place, an inn, a cousin's barn, or worst of all, a crumbling old house at the edge of the village, bed placement became even more urgent. Locals would often advise you to turn the mattress 3 times before sleeping, just to confuse any lurking spirits or leftover bad luck from previous guests. As a bonus, it might also shake out any spiders, which were rarely considered good luck unless they spun their webs above your head, in which case you were supposed to leave them as a sign of prosperity. Of course, not everyone agreed on all these details. Sleep was personal, and every village had its own twist. Some insisted that tucking a broom by the bed kept witches away, while others warned it might sweep your luck out the door. If you married into a new family, you could find yourself learning a whole new set of sleep etiquette. We always sleep with our heads to the north here, your new in-laws might say. Otherwise, the cows give sour milk. You might laugh, but go ahead, try sleeping the other way, and see if you get invited back. Here's a little joke to tuck under your pillow tonight. What do you call a medieval interior designer? Someone who spent more time debating bed angles than actually sleeping. In noble houses and monasteries, bed placement was as much about symbolism as superstition. Monks often slept in rows, heads to the east, in chilly dormitories, lined up like spiritual compasses. Nobles, on the other hand, sometimes placed their beds in raised alcoves or even behind curtains, hoping to ward off drafts, evil eyes, and nosy relatives. The most extravagant bed of all, the state bed, was reserved for royalty and visiting VIPs, a veritable fortress of embroidered canopies, feather-stuffed mattresses, and occasionally a guard dog curled up at the foot. By morning, the rules of bed placement would fade into the background. As daylight returned,
and spirits supposedly lost their power. But each evening, the careful rituals would begin again. A nudge here, a turn there, a whispered prayer, or a quick check for misplaced shoes. It was all about stacking the odds in your favour, even if the real battle was always against the simple fact that medieval nights could be cold, dark, and just a bit too long. So next time you climb into bed, maybe give a little thought to which way your head is pointing, what's tucked under your mattress, and what stories you're inviting to curl up beside you. If nothing else, it's a good excuse for rearranging your bedroom and blaming it on historical accuracy. You've got your bed facing the luckiest direction, your head safely east, and your feet nowhere near the door. You might think you're all set for an undisturbed night's sleep, but in the Middle Ages, it wasn't enough to trust in bed placement alone. No, you needed a veritable arsenal of protective charms, household rituals, and a nightly checklist that would put a modern airport security line to shame. In a world where sleep was a dangerous voyage, most people preferred not to sail unarmed. Picture yourself tucking in for the night. Before you close your eyes, you're running through a little routine. Maybe it's sprinkling salt along the windowsill, a habit passed down from your grandmother, who claimed it blocked evil spirits from slipping in with the night air. Or perhaps you mutter a short prayer, not just for yourself, but for everyone under your roof. Some families insisted on reciting the Lord's Prayer backwards, a feat of mental gymnastics meant to baffle demons, and, as a bonus, probably put you to sleep through sheer confusion. Mainstream historical fact, charms and amulets were a staple of medieval sleep culture. Little tokens were sewn into pillows or hung above beds, bits of iron, sprigs of rue or rosemary, coins stamped with saints, and even the occasional chicken bone, preferably from a black rooster. The logic was simple. Evil hates the smell of certain herbs, is confused by shiny objects, and fears anything associated with holy figures. Of course, if you didn't have a saint's medallion handy, you could improvise. In Italy, some families tucked garlic cloves under the mattress, while in Ireland, a piece of bread wrapped in linen was the go-to for keeping nightmares at bay. It wasn't glamorous, but it was better than waking up with your soul missing. Then there are the nightly rituals that border on performance art. Take the story of the man who circled his house 3 times with a candle before bed, muttering the names of all his ancestors, or the woman who slept with a bell tied to her toe, convinced the faintest jingle would scare away anything looking to settle on her chest. Quirky detail, in some regions, people believed tying a red thread around your big toe could keep witches from stealing your breath as you slept. Not exactly a spa treatment, but you'd be surprised how many people tried it. If you lived in a bigger household, or say an overcrowded inn, you had the added fun of group rituals. Someone would splash water across the threshold, another would draw protective symbols in chalk, and everyone had to agree on the right psalm to recite together. It was community bonding at its finest, with a dash of competitive paranoia. Did you remember the rosemary? Is the broom handle up or down? For heaven's sake, don't leave your shoes upside down. It's enough to make you nostalgic for the simplicity of just locking the front door. Rituals extended beyond the walls too. It was common for people to walk around their homes at dusk, checking for open windows, loose shutters, or any sign that a witch might have marked the property. If you spotted something odd, a bundle of sticks, a strange smear on the door, you didn't question it. You called the local wise woman, who would likely show up with a pot of something, foul-smelling, and a song that made the neighbours roll their eyes. But afterward, you always slept a little easier. Historians still argue whether these protective customs were genuinely believed, or simply a way of asserting control over an unpredictable world. After all, when your best medical advice involved leeches and prayers, sometimes a handful of salt or an iron horseshoe felt like a better bet. And while these rituals often look silly to modernize, it's worth noting how universal they are. Even now, people keep lucky charms, knock on wood, or sleep with a favourite object nearby. Maybe we're not so different from those medieval villagers after all.
You might be thinking, what's the harm?
And honestly, there usually wasn't any, unless of course you forgot to reset a charm and woke up to find your milk soured, your cat acting weird, or your uncle swearing that a ghost had stolen his left shoe. Light joke, if you ever wanted an excuse for losing things around the house, medieval superstition had your back.
Sorry, Aunt Mildred, spirits must have taken it again.
There were of course those who took things too far. A few rare souls dedicated their lives to warding off the dark. These were the so-called cunning folk, witches, healers, and self-proclaimed experts in all things supernatural. They'd craft elaborate amulets, prescribe pungent brews, or charge a fee to bless your pillow. Their reputations were a mixed bag, loved when things went right, blamed when things went wrong. One bad night's sleep, and suddenly everyone was knocking on your door, demanding a refund or a new chant. One of the oddest sleep rituals involved beds themselves. Some households hammered an iron nail into the bed frame, just in case the wood attracted mischievous sprites. In wealthier homes, they might tuck a silver coin under the pillow for extra protection. But beware, silver worked against evil. But if you kept it too close, it could attract greedy fairies, who loved shiny things as much as the next magpie. It was a delicate balancing act, just enough protection, but not so much that you courted new trouble. The real trick was remembering which charm or ritual went with which problem. Trouble sleeping? Try mugwort or lavender. Nightmares? Salt and iron. Unexplained bruises or scratches. Definitely a sign to up your rosemary game, and maybe bribe the local priest for a quick blessing. Sometimes it seemed as if sleep itself was a battlefield, and you were the lone defender armed with herbs, coins, and whispered prayers. As you nestle into your carefully protected bed, you might wonder whether any of this actually worked. Scholars continue to debate if these customs truly calmed the mind, or if they simply gave people something to focus on, besides the darkness pressing in from all sides. But the power of belief is hard to measure, and sometimes the feeling of safety is almost as good as the real thing. So tonight, as you check your own nightly routine, locking the door, turning the pillow, maybe lining up your shoes just right, remember you're carrying on a tradition that stretches back centuries.
And if you ever feel silly about clutching that lucky charm, just imagine yourself in a candlelit room, surrounded by the sounds of the medieval night, and ask yourself, would you really sleep better without it? You're lying in bed, finally convinced that every spirit is banished, every charm in place, when you hear it, a faint creak in the hallway, a soft scuff of feet on the planks.
Maybe it's a family member heading for a midnight drink, but in the medieval mind, sleepwalking was rarely so innocent. The night was thick with suspicion, and anyone who wandered while asleep might be seen as enchanted, cursed, or possessed by something beyond simple dreams. Sleepwalking, or noctambulism if you're feeling scholarly, was more than just an embarrassing family story in medieval Europe.
It was a riddle wrapped in a nightmare, dressed in someone's nightshirt. If you rose in the middle of the night and drifted through the dark, people might whisper that your soul had gotten lost on its nightly journey, and your body was just trying to follow. Some believed a sleepwalker's soul was halfway to the other world, and to wake them suddenly was to risk snapping the delicate thread that kept them tethered to life.
No pressure for the family, right? Mainstream historical fact. Medieval medical texts do mention sleepwalking, though explanations range from humoral imbalances to the influence of the moon. Learned doctors argued over whether it was a physical disorder or a spiritual crisis. But among the villagers, explanations took a sharper turn. Many believed the wandering sleeper was under the sway of spirits, sometimes even the devil himself. There were even tales of entire villages gathering to watch as someone walked straight through thorny hedges or over rooftops, utterly unharmed. Scholars still argue if these accounts were exaggerated, misunderstood epileptic fits, or just village gossip spun into legend on long winter nights. And then there was the shadowy line between sleepwalking and possession. If you mumbled in strange tongues, wandered without memory, or acted oddly during sleep, there was a real risk you'd end up in the local priest's care, or worse, accused of consorting with dark powers. A quirky tidbit: in some parts of France and Italy, it was believed that a sleepwalker should never be called by name or have their path blocked, lest the force guiding them turn on the interrupt. Instead, gentle guidance, a broom laid across the threshold, a whispered prayer, or simply letting the person wander until they return to bed, was the preferred strategy. If a person wandered too far, however, things could turn truly alarming. A famous case in 14th century Germany tells of a young man who left his house, crossed the village green, and walked straight into a pond. He was fished out, cold but with life, and the story quickly grew into a tale of demon visitation. His family was instructed to hang iron bells from his bedposts, sew protective herbs into his nightclothes, and, if all else failed, sleep in shifts to ensure someone was always awake during the dangerous hours. The fear didn't stop at sleepwalking. Night terrors, somnambulistic fits, and even simple nightmares could be interpreted as spiritual attacks. Children who cried out in the night were sometimes thought to be the targets of witches or restless spirits, especially if their dreams were vivid or violent. Protective measures abounded, salt sprinkled across thresholds, bowls of water placed beneath beds to catch evil, or family relics placed under pillows as shields. Historians still debate how much of this was genuine belief, and how much was simply desperate parents looking for any solution to a sleepless night. Of course, in true medieval fashion, there was a joke to be found. If someone sleepwalked right into the family's bread dough or tangled themselves in the drying laundry, it was said that the spirits must have a sense of humour or a very poor sense of direction. Some villagers believed that certain times of the year made sleepwalking and night disturbances more likely. The eve of major feast days, nights of the full moon, or even the days leading up to harvest, were seen as particularly dangerous. This belief tied in with older pagan festivals and agricultural superstitions, when the boundaries between worlds seemed especially thin. To guard against wandering souls, both living and dead, people would sometimes set up obstacles, a closed door, a strategically placed bench, or even a line of beans scattered across the floor, because, as you surely know, spirits just cannot resist counting beans. If all else failed, and a person continued to wander at night, families might turn to the church. Exorcisms, blessings, or pilgrimages to holy sites were sometimes recommended, though these could be expensive or risky in their own right. Occasionally, the afflicted would be sent to monasteries or convents, places believed to be so holy that no spirit would dare follow. Did it work? Well, the monastery was at least quieter than most village homes, and there was always someone awake at night to keep watch. A final lingering fear for many medieval families was that sleepwalking might be contagious, a sign that the household itself was cursed or marked for tragedy. In a world so full of uncertainty, even the most mundane acts could spiral into elaborate webs of suspicion and anxiety. Yet, in most cases, the sleeper would wake safely in their bed, none the wiser, while the family shared stories and superstitions for years to come. So tonight, if you find yourself wandering the hall at midnight in search of a snack, just be grateful no one's watching with a crucifix or a sprig of rue. And if someone in your house does sleepwalk, maybe leave the broom where it is, and let the spirits work it out amongst themselves. Outside, the village settles into its uneasy slumber, but the night is rarely silent for long. You're half asleep, comforted by the warmth of bodies and the scratchy reassurance of old wool, when a deep, resonant sound splits the darkness. Church bells. If you're lucky, it's only the hour being struck. But in medieval times, bells served as more than just timekeepers. They were the guardians of your sleep, the very voice of the village, and if you listen to the tales passed down by firelight, a barrier against the wild things lurking just out of sight. Mainstream historical fact: church bells were believed to have genuine power over the supernatural. Their echoes were said to purify the air, drive away evil spirits, and even prevent storms or plagues.
Monasteries and parishes across Europe kept careful schedules for ringing bells at key moments, matins, vespers, midnight vigils, and crucially, during sudden night alarms. A bell tolling in the small hours could send shivers up the spines of villagers who wondered whether it meant someone was dying, a fire had broken out, or something stranger was afoot.
But bells didn't just scare off ghosts. They were meant to drive away night creatures, the shapeless anxieties of medieval life. The folklore varied, but almost every region agreed that monsters and mischief makers despised the clangor of iron. Some said that a bell's note was so pure it reminded evil of heaven, making it flee. Others claimed it simply hurt the ears of restless souls, demons and witches who prowled the darkness, looking for trouble. Historians still argue whether this belief started as a clever bit of church PR, or whether the origins lie further back, in pagan traditions where noise was used to chase away evil at the turning of the year. The stories get even better. In some parts of France and the Low Countries, villagers believed the bells could tie down wandering spirits for the night. The moment the bell sounded, ghosts were forced to scatter, demons lost their way, and any witches caught mid-flight would plummet straight to earth, sometimes right into the chicken coop. Quirky tidbit: in one infamous case, a rooster was put on trial after the village swore it had turned into a witch during the midnight ringing. Bells were everywhere, but they weren't the only sounds filling the medieval night. Sometimes you'd hear the low chanting of night prayers, the shuffle of a night watchman's boots, or more rarely, a faint animal howl that made everyone draw their blankets a little tighter. Each sound was layered with meaning and superstition. It's easy to forget how noisy the past could be, even without the hum of traffic or the ping of a phone. You might even find yourself drifting towards sleep when the bells strike again, echoing in the cold air. For some, it's soothing, for others it's a warning. If you wake during the tolling, do you count the chimes or pull your covers over your head? The answer might depend on what you've been told. Some families believed you had to whisper a prayer for every bell, or you'd be vulnerable to the very things the bells were meant to ward off. There's a lighter side to this, of course.
Medieval joke. What do you call someone who sleeps through the bells? Either blessed or doomed. Nobody could agree. The local blacksmith always said it just meant you'd had too much ale. Animals too played their role in the nocturnal symphony. Cats and dogs were often seen as both protectors and possible harbingers of trouble.
If your cat yowled at midnight or your dog whimpered during the bells, people watched closely for omens. Some said the animals could sense things humans missed. Others figured it was just the neighbours' bad singing. The bells didn't only serve to keep the village in line, they set the rhythm for the night's safety rituals.
If you heard bells at the wrong time, a single lonesome clang or a frantic peal in the dead of night, you might rush to check that everyone was safely inside, doors would be bolted, candles relit, and sometimes whole households would huddle together and recite psalms or share stories to keep fear at bay. This sense of shared vigilance was a medieval security system, long before there were locks on every door. Historians still debate whether this midnight soundscape actually made people feel safer, or if it simply reminded everyone how thin the wall between order and chaos really was. In some towns, night watchmen would carry small bells of their own, shaking them at crossroads and alleyways, just in case a lost soul or mischief maker needed a not-so-gentle nudge back to the shadows. Yet, for all their power, bells could be unsettling. A bell that rang unexpectedly, or at an odd hour, was a sure sign that something was wrong. Was it an omen, a warning, or just the wind tugging at the rope? You'd listen, breath held, hoping for the reassuring voice of the watchman calling all's well, into the darkness.
As the hours crawl by, the bells fade into the background, and you drift further towards sleep, comforted, if only a little, by the idea that someone, somewhere, is keeping watch. And if your dreams are especially quiet tonight, maybe you have the church bells to thank. Or maybe it's just that you've finally learned the secret to medieval sleep. A little noise, a little ritual, and a lot of looking out for each other. So, the next time you hear a bell ring late at night, don't be too quick to dismiss it as just another sound. Imagine it's the last line of defense, echoing through the centuries, still doing its best to keep you safe until morning. And just as you're drifting into that delicious state between waking and dreaming, a sudden weight pins you to the bed. Your eyes snap open, but your body refuses to budge. The room is familiar, and yet warped. Shadows pulsing at the edge of your vision. The old rafters overhead menacing in the gloom. A deep pressure on your chest, breath caught halfway, panic mounting. If you've ever experienced sleep paralysis, you know how terrifying it can feel. But in the medieval world, this wasn't just a trick of the mind. This was the work of the nightmare, a real living creature, bent on torment. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval Europe was rife with stories of the mare or mara, a supernatural being believed to invade your sleep, sit on your chest, and squeeze the life out of you. In Germany, she was called Nachtmar. The English called it a night hag. Norse legend spoke of the mare riding the sleeper until dawn. There was no clinical term for sleep paralysis. Instead, you were literally being attacked by an evil presence, and everyone had advice about how to fend it off. Advice you might find oddly familiar if you've ever read late-night forums on insomnia. If you woke up paralyzed, the first thought wasn't my brain's misfiring. It was, what have I done to deserve this? Was it something you ate? Did you forget a prayer or leave the bed facing the wrong direction? Historians still argue whether people truly believed in the literal existence of these creatures, or if it was a way to explain the universal terror of waking up, unable to move. Whatever the truth, the feeling of helplessness was all too real. For some, the attacks were a sign of witchcraft or curses. If a particular person kept suffering from these night terrors, their family might suspect that a jealous neighbour had sent the mare their way. Quirky detail. In parts of Scandinavia, you could protect yourself by placing your shoes upside down, under the bed, or by keeping a knife under your pillow, though one can only imagine the hazards of midnight rolling over onto a blade. If you were particularly unlucky, the problem wasn't just the mare. There were stories of incubi and succubi, demons that came in the night to torment, tempt, or simply exhaust their victims. Some monks wrote at length about the dangers of these nighttime visitors, blending theology with local superstition and a hefty dose of creative storytelling. A light joke for your troubles, a medieval cure for incubi, cold water, prayer, and a strongly worded complaint to the abbot. For children, the explanations were sometimes gentler but no less spooky. Parents might say that a pressing spirit was just an overzealous fairy or an ancestor who'd grown bored in the afterlife. To banish it, children would be taught to say special prayers or clutch a family relic, a silver coin, a scrap of cloth from a saint's robe, or the ever-handy sprig of rue. Historians still debate whether these little rituals provided comfort or just made bedtime that much more theatrical. Households had a whole playbook for defending against night attacks. Some kept iron objects by the bed, trusting in iron's age-old reputation as a demon deterrent. Others sewed elaborate patterns into their nightclothes, knots and crosses, and runic charms thought to confuse or repel any lurking spirit. In certain places, people drew protective symbols on their foreheads before sleep, a habit that left more than a few villagers with smudged brows come morning. And if you managed to sleep through the night untouched, you'd still check yourself in the morning for any signs, a bruise, a scratch, a feeling of heaviness that might linger all day. If something seemed amiss, you'd spend the rest of the day correcting your rituals, resorting the doorways,
or if things were truly dire, seeking the help of the local priest or healer.
Not all responses to night terrors were grim, though. Some medieval folk managed to laugh about it. There's a record from the Low Countries of a man who, after a particularly bad nightmare, got up in the morning, made a dummy out of turnips and straw, and placed it in his bed the next night.
When the mare visited, she'd be fooled into haunting the decoy, leaving him free to sleep in peace, at least until his wife found turnips under the covers. And let's not forget the enduring scholarly debate. Were these experiences purely physiological, as modern science suggests, or did the rituals themselves create a sense of protection that helped people cope? Even now, the boundary between body and mind, between the rational and the magical, is blurry at 3 in the morning. As you finally drift into deeper sleep, remember, you're not alone. Across centuries, millions have lain awake, staring into the dark, hearts thudding, waiting for the heaviness to lift. Some found comfort in prayers, some in chants, some in the hope that, come morning, the mare would have moved on to trouble someone else. So tonight, if you feel a weight on your chest, or see a shadow in the corner of your eye, just know you're sharing a very ancient tradition. Maybe mutter a prayer or flip your pillow, just in case. And if all else fails, a good laugh in the morning is sometimes the best cure. Now, the church bells have faded, your protective charms are in place, and the nightmare seems to have passed for now. As you snuggle deeper into your bed, you might wonder if you're finally safe. But in the medieval world, the line between the sacred and the superstitious was blurry at best, and even the holiest advice could come wrapped in mystery. Sleep, after all, was a state so close to death that only the blessing of saints and the mercy of God could truly guarantee your safe return to waking life. Or so they hoped. It's morning now, sunlight dribbles in through cracks in the shutters, and you wake with a sift back, the chill still clinging to your bones. In many households, your first act is to thank the saints for your survival, literally. Mainstream historical fact. In monasteries, nuns and monks followed rules that included set prayers before sleep, and immediately upon waking, "Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit," they'd whisper, echoing the words of Jesus on the cross, hoping to reclaim their soul from wherever it had wandered overnight. But the power of sacred sleep wasn't just for those tucked away in stone cloisters. Every family had its own blend of Christian ritual and folk custom. A popular bedtime prayer went something like, "May Christ and the Virgin guard my soul as I sleep, and Saint Michael stand by my head to chase away evil." If you had a particular devotion, say Saint Apollonia for toothaches, or Saint Christopher for travellers, you might whisper their names for extra protection. Historians still argue whether these nightly prayers arose from deep piety or simple desperation to ward off everything the darkness promised. Quirky detail. If a child had trouble sleeping, a parent might tie a tiny figurine of a saint around the bedpost, or even slip a painted stone beneath the pillow. In some towns, it was common to loan sacred relics from the parish church for a night, especially after a spate of bad dreams. You'd pay a small fee and borrow, say, a splinter of the true cross, or a saint's bone, hoping the holy object would bring peaceful sleep, or at least give your anxious mind something to focus on, besides the creaks and groans of the night. Of course, not all sleep was considered equal. Some rest was holy, a midday nap taken after prayers, a few blissful minutes in the church pew during a long sermon. Everyone did it, especially in winter. The holy nap was more than just a quick snooze. It was an act of trust, a brief surrender of the soul to God's care in daylight. Stories circulated of saints and prophets who received visions or healing in sleep. Their slumber transformed into something sacred. Some monasteries even had beds specially blessed for use by the sick, as if sanctified linen could drive away fever and bad spirits alike. In contrast, sleep that crept in at the wrong time was deeply suspicious. Drift off during a vigil, you risked inviting sloth, one of the deadly sins. Nod off in church, some swore it left you vulnerable to demonic attack, or at the very least, to being the butt of village jokes for weeks. Light joke, if you ever wondered how many monks it takes to snore through a midnight mass, the answer is all of them, eventually. For the truly devout, there was always the question, could your dreams be messages from God? Sometimes maybe. The Bible is full of prophetic dreamers, and medieval folk took those stories seriously. If you woke with a strange vision, the first stop was often the priest, who might offer interpretation or suggest penance. But as often as not, dreams were muddled, mixing leftover worries, village gossip, and a dash of bad cabbage. Yet, the sacred and the superstitious tangled together. Some monks, fearful of evil dreams, would sleep with a crucifix clutched in their hands, or recite psalms over their beds each night. In some abbeys, water blessed during the Feast of Epiphany was sprinkled on bedding, and old Saints' Day rituals called for a slice of bread to be left on the windowsill for any wandering soul in need of a blessing or a midnight snack. Historians still debate, was all this ritual a genuine expression of faith, or simply another tool to keep the terrors of the night at bay? Maybe both. After all, the border between sacred protection and practical anxiety has always been a little.
But for every story of terror or demonic visit, there was an equal and opposite tradition of comfort. Parents sang soft hymns or lullabies. Some, dating back centuries, elders told gentle stories of guardian angels, of Jesus calming storms, of saints who watched over travellers as they slept in the wild.
In a world so full of uncertainty, these rituals, holy or otherwise, offered a sense of order, a pattern to hold on to, and a hope that the night would pass peacefully. So tonight, as you settle into your own routine, whether it's a quick prayer, a favourite song, or simply a deep breath in the dark, remember that you're part of a tradition much older than you might guess. And if you find yourself sleeping more soundly after muttering a few extra words to the universe, you're just one more sleeper in a long line of anxious, hopeful dreamers. With daylight streaming through the cracks, the anxieties of the night begin to fade, replaced by the small comforts of routine. Yet in the medieval world, sleep wasn't always a solitary affair. More often than not, you'd find yourself bundled up shoulder to shoulder with family, servants, or even the occasional traveller seeking shelter. Communal sleeping was the norm, a fact both practical and, depending on your luck, just a little bit cursed. Let's say you're bedding down in a crowded peasant cottage, the fire has burned down to embers, and there's hardly enough space to stretch your legs. Children are sprawled across laps, elders claim the warmest corners, and someone's always snoring. You might envy the solitude of a modern bedroom, but in the Middle Ages, sleeping together was all about survival. Mainstream historical fact, shared beds and crowded sleeping arrangements kept people warmer, safer from thieves, and, in many cases, healthier. There was strength in numbers, if not always in peace and quiet. Yet, with more bodies came more superstitions. Who you slept next to, where you lay in the room, even which blanket you used, could all become matters of magical thinking and whispered caution. Children were sometimes placed at the edge of the bed, closest to the walls, to protect them from whatever might slip in through the darkness. But in some regions, the youngest were kept in the centre, pressed safely between adults, just in case a spirit tried to snatch the innocent away. There was no consensus, only the endless, anxious calculus of old wives' tale. A quirky detail, in parts of Scandinavia and Germany, it was believed that a bed shared by too many people became heavy with dreams, so crowded with thoughts and worries that nightmares could multiply. To counter this, some families tied a ribbon or belt around the bedstead to bind the dreams together, keeping evil visions from spilling over. Whether it worked is still debated by the rare scholar willing to research the sleep patterns of 6 peasants, 2 goats, and an unusually insistent rooster. Even the act of sharing a blanket had its rules. Passing a cover from one sleeper to another could transmit more than warmth. It might, so people said, pass along dreams, luck, or even an illness. If someone had a fever or had recently suffered a nightmare, you'd think twice before sharing their quilt. Sometimes, families would mark individual blankets with herbs, charms, or bits of coloured thread. Early versions of This One's Mine don't touch. It wasn't just peasants and villagers either. In inns and taverns, travellers who couldn't afford their own room often paid for a place in the bed, sandwiched between strangers and their belongings. Light joke. If you thought snoring was bad, wait until you've tried sleeping next to a merchant with a pouch full of squeaky coins and a loot he refuses to leave behind. But communal sleeping could foster its own kind of security. With more eyes and ears, a household could respond quickly to nighttime threats, be it a fire, a prowler, or in the rarest of cases, an actual wandering spirit. One person's nightmare was everyone's business. If a child cried out, or an elder whispered of a shadow at the window, the whole family would wake, relight the fire, and share a story or two until calm returned. It was social safety as much as superstition, and maybe even a little bit of early therapy. There was also a curious flip side. Sometimes curses seemed to spread in groups. A string of bad dreams or sleepless nights might be blamed on a tainted bed or a visitor with troubled spirits. Beds were sometimes aired out, not just for cleanliness, but to clear the air of lingering ill fortune. In a few notorious cases, whole families would relocate, switching beds and even bedrooms, until the bad luck moved on. Historians still argue whether this was about germs, magic, or just the universal hope that a change of scenery would help. For children, bedtime was a lesson in folklore and family history. Grandparents told stories of brave sleepers who outwitted the spirits, or warned of those who ignored the rules and paid the price. A favourite tale involved a clever girl who swapped places in the bed each night, making it impossible for the nightmare to find her, a tactic still recommended by some older siblings. And then there were the house guests. Letting a stranger share your bed was a gamble, a test of trust, hospitality, and courage. There are records of noble families inviting guests to sleep in the great hall under the watchful eyes of ancestral portraits, and allegedly the lingering spirits of long-dead relatives. If you managed to wake up with all your possessions intact, it was a good omen for future travels. Communal sleep didn't always mean restful nights, but it did mean you were rarely alone with your fears. For every cold draught, there was a shared blanket. For every odd noise, someone else was awake to hear it. And if the spirits got too bold, you could always blame the snoring and pull the covers tighter. So tonight, as you stretch out in your own bed, alone or surrounded by others, imagine the flicker of firelight, the sound of quiet breathing, and the endless, ever-changing rituals that have kept people company through centuries of darkness. Even when the superstitions fade, the simple comfort of not facing the night alone might be the best protection of all. After another crowded night, you wake with a crick in your neck and a suspicious itch. Sleep, it turns out, isn't always as restorative as promised, especially when you're lying next to half the village and every flea between here and Flanders. Yet, medieval people were nothing if not determined, and so the quest for a perfect night's rest led to a whole cabinet of strange remedies, household hacks, and genuinely creative attempts to banish insomnia. Medieval insomnia was no joke. The reasons were many. Aches and pains, noisy beds, howling winds, hunger, or just plain anxiety about tomorrow's harvest. Some nights you just couldn't sleep, and staring at the ceiling beams gave you plenty of time to wonder whether you dined and invited a spirit in, left your shoes the wrong way round, or annoyed the wrong neighbour. Mainstream historical fact: Insomnia wasn't a medical condition so much as a symptom, a sign of spiritual unrest, bad air, or sometimes divine intervention. Doctors and wise women alike prescribed a hodgepodge of solutions. Let's start with the classics. Counting sheep, that's no medieval myth. Shepherds and their sleepless apprentices often counted their flock by moonlight, using the repetition to lull themselves back to sleep. But if you didn't have a flock handy, you'd turn to more creative remedies. In England, it was said that reciting the Psalms backwards, slowly and without stumbling, could bore even the most haunted soul into slumber. Across the Channel, French villagers swore by drinking warm milk steeped with poppy seeds or crushed lettuce, both thought to have sleep-inducing powers. And then there were the more experimental approaches. Quirky detail. In some parts of rural Italy, you might find someone attempting to confuse insomnia by switching pillows with another sleeper, passing the sleeplessness along like a game of hot potato. If the next morning your neighbour looked extra groggy, you'd know your plan had worked. Herbal lore was everywhere. Lavender, chamomile, and hops were favourites for stuffing pillows or brewing into teas. Mugwort, as mentioned before, was believed to bring dreams, sometimes good, sometimes unsettlingly vivid. St. John's wort and valerian root made regular appearances in medieval sleep potions, though you had to watch your dosage or risk visions even wilder than your worst nightmare. Some wise women carried little bundles of sleep herbs, which they'd wave under your nose while chanting sleepy rhymes. "If you sneeze, you lose," as the local joke went. But what if herbs and counting failed? You might resort to physical tricks. A cold stone placed at the foot of the bed was said to draw the restlessness down and out through your toes. Some people tried sleeping with a slice of bread under the pillow, allegedly to feed the hungry spirits causing their wakefulness.
You true desperate. You could try sleeping in a different room for a night, or better yet, switching beds with someone who always seemed to sleep soundly. You can see why people guarded their favourite spot. Historians still argue whether these remedies worked by calming the mind, tricking the brain, or just giving people something to focus on besides their worries.
But the ritual itself, the act of trying, brought comfort. Modern sleep experts call it sleep hygiene. Medieval villagers called it doing what you must. For those who could afford it, there were even more exotic cures. Some wealthy households imported perfumes, using rosewater or spiced sachets to scent pillows and lull restless sleepers. In the Arab world, scholars wrote treatises on sleep, recommending gentle music, fresh linens, and even carefully planned evening meals. But let's be honest, most medieval folks were lucky if they had a clean blanket and a little peace before dawn's first chores. Of course, the threat of insomnia was sometimes blamed on dark forces. If you lay awake too long, it was whispered your soul might become unmoored, making you vulnerable to nightmares, bad luck, or worst of all, a wandering spirit slipping in to take your place. To ward this off, people sometimes left a candle burning low through the night, or recited protection prayers each time they turned on the mattress. If you still couldn't sleep, it was time to call in the expert, be it a priest, healer, or the grandmother with a terrifyingly large jar of sleep dust. Slight joke, if you want to guarantee sleep, just ask a medieval herbalist to explain all their remedies. You'll be out like a light before they finish. And if nothing worked, well, you just learned to live with it. Some folks would get up and start their chores early. Others would sit by the fire and watch for omens in the flames. Insomnia, in the end, was a part of life, just another shadow on the long, uncertain road to dawn. So next time you find yourself tossing and turning, consider reaching for a little lavender, counting something soft, or switching sides of the bed. After all, if it worked for your ancestors, at least some of the time, it might just work for you. You finally drift off, just as a silvery light sneaks past the shutters and washes across your face. It's the full moon again, a sight that stirred as much awe as anxiety since the dawn of time. In the medieval world, moonlight wasn't just romantic, it was risky. There were few things more likely to set the villagers whispering than a bright moon and a rough night's sleep. Because if you woke up after a moonlit night, feeling groggy or plagued by bad dreams, you weren't alone. The moon, after all, was a notorious troublemaker. Mainstream historical fact, the influence of the moon on sleep, dreams and health was accepted by virtually everyone in the Middle Ages, from learned physicians to humble field hands. The lunar lunacy idea was so popular that some doctors claimed people were more likely to go mad or at least act out of sorts during a full moon. Scholars and folk healers tracked the lunar phases closely, aligning everything from planting crops to performing surgeries with the cycles in the sky. When it came to sleep, the advice was clear: beware of sleeping in the direct light of a full moon. If your bed was near a window, your family probably went to extra lengths to block out the moon's glow. Shutters were closed tight, blankets pinned over gaps, and in some places windows themselves were smeared with herbs or soot. Why such precaution? It was widely believed that the moon's rays could draw out the soul, making sleepers restless, prone to nightmares, or even vulnerable to sleepwalking. Historians still argue whether this belief came from ancient Greek medical theories, or the simple universal experience of a sleepless bright night. Quirky detail: in parts of Eastern Europe, people wore little moon-shaped pendants at night, not to celebrate lunar beauty, but to ward off the moon's more mischievous effects. If you dreamed of the moon, it was interpreted as an omen, sometimes a sign of pregnancy, sometimes a warning of coming storms, or, less helpfully, a hint that you'd soon lose something dear. It depended on who you asked, and how convincing their dream interpretation face was. Children were especially susceptible, so it was said. Parents would warn them not to look at the full moon before bed, lest their dreams become tangled with goblins and witches. If a child woke from a bad dream during a moonlit night, it was a cause for quick action. A handful of holy water, a whispered prayer, and a check to make sure the moon's light hadn't fallen directly on their face. And if the child was caught sleepwalking, well, everyone agreed the moon was to blame. Better lock the doors and keep a bowl of salt by the bed, just in case. Even the animals weren't safe from lunar mischief. Farmers swore that cows gave sour milk after a night under the full moon. Hens laid odd-coloured eggs, and dogs howled at ghosts only they could see. If a neighbour's cat was especially restless, you might exchange a knowing look. Must be the moon again. Light joke. If you want to blame your bad day on something, why not the moon? It's been getting away with it for centuries. Village nights on the full moon were often lively, as people gathered outside to watch the sky and share stories. But once it was time for bed, superstitions took hold. Those who braved a moonlit walk risked more than stubbed toes. There were tales of travellers losing their way, enchanted by moonbeams, or lured off the path by fairy lights. A clever walker might carry a sprig of rosemary, or keep their hat pulled low to protect their thoughts from lunar meddling. In noble houses, moon-fearing rituals could be even more elaborate. Servants draped heavy curtains over every window, and housekeepers laid out extra charms or switched out the regular bedding for moon-safe linens.
Was it truly effective?
Historians still debate whether it offered genuine protection or just reassured anxious sleepers. At the very least, it provided a sense of agency against the unpredictable. And the dreams, oh, the dreams! Lunar nights were famous for producing vivid, unsettling, or even prophetic visions. Some said the moon amplified whatever lingered in your heart, turning small worries into wild nighttime adventures. If you awoke sweating after a night of wild chases and strange faces, you had your excuse ready. It was the moon, you'd say, and everyone would nod, perhaps a bit too eagerly. The cycle of superstition reached its peak at certain times of year. The harvest moon, bright and bold, was seen as both a blessing for crops and a curse for sleep. Villagers planned their work and their rest around these nights, accepting poor sleep as the price for nature's bounty. After all, who could argue with the moon? Its slow, steady climb across the sky was as ancient as the fear and wonder it inspired. So tonight, as the moon beams through your window, you might find yourself tugging the blanket a little higher, or turning your face away from the light. Whether it's science, folklore, or just centuries of anxious sleepers whispering advice across time, it's a reminder that even the calmest night can hold a hint of magic or mischief when the moon is full. You finally nod off, only to wake again, scratching. Something's moving beneath the blanket, and in the flickering moonlight you spot it, a tiny, determined bedbug making its nightly rounds. Welcome to the medieval sleeper's eternal nemesis, the world of creepy crawlies, unwanted guests, and the curses people swore were behind every itch and bite. For every spirit haunting your dreams, there were a dozen pests gnawing at your peace. Mainstream historical fact: bed bugs, fleas, lice, and mites were constant companions in medieval Europe. No matter your status, peasant or prince, no one was completely safe. Homes with straw mattresses, rush-strewn floors, and shared bedding provided perfect conditions for these little invaders. Sleep was a battle, not just against nightmares, but against the armies of insects lying in wait for their midnight feast. If you awoke scratching, you were in good company. Even kings' letters complained of bites and restless nights. But the pests weren't just an annoyance. In an era when illness and misfortune were often blamed on magic or malice, even the tiniest tormentors could become evidence of a curse. Quirky detail: in parts of France and Italy, an unexplained infestation was enough to set the neighbors whispering that your household had attracted the evil eye, or had been hexed by a jealous rival. There are stories of women digging up the mattress, stuffing in the moonlight, searching for hidden charms, or objects believed to cause bad luck, like a cursed hairpin, a clump of animal fur, or a coin marked with strange symbols. Superstition and pest control were closely linked. Some believed that sprinkling blessed salt in your bedding could keep both spirits and fleas at bay. Others relied on herbs, lavender, pennyroyal, and wormwood was stuffed into mattresses, pillows, and even slippers, not just for their pleasant smell, but because they were thought to repel everything from lice to evil spirits. In Ireland, a sprig of elder placed under the mattress was a common charm, thought to cool the temper of both bedbugs and witches. Historians still argue whether these rituals did anything practical, or just provided a sense of hope when sleep grew scarce. For those truly plagued by pests, there were more drastic solutions. Some households burned their mattresses and swept out the ashes, a costly but effective method for a fresh start. Others set out bowls of vinegar or placed pieces of bread soaked in wine near the bed to lure out unwanted visitors. One enterprising apothecary even sold flea traps, small wooden discs filled with blood or honey, though, as the joke went, these usually just made the dogs sticky. Children were often the most afflicted, their soft skin irresistible to hungry bugs. Parents worried over every bite, convinced it could be the first sign of a curse or illness. To guard against this, some mothers would tie red thread around a child's wrist, a gesture believed to ward off both insects and jealousy. If all else failed, a few whispered prayers to Saint Bibiana, the patron saint against headaches and, by local extension, itchy skin, might be in order. But not all pest-related superstition was about fear. Some villagers insisted that a single flea in the bed meant good luck, especially if you managed to catch it before it bit you. Others told stories of clever saints or cunning housewives who outsmarted bugs with nothing but clever words and a pinch of salt. If you found yourself covered in bites, it was said you could pass your bad luck to the river by washing your sheets under a full moon, assuming you weren't caught by the night watchman. Even household pets had a role to play. Cats and dogs were essential for pest control, and their nighttime activities were often viewed as omens. A cat sleeping at your feet was a sign that the night would pass safely. A restless or yowling animal, on the other hand, could mean more trouble ahead, whether from bugs or from the other side. Light joke, medieval advice for bedbugs. Get a cat. Medieval advice if the cat brings in more fleas. Get a bigger bed. Yet, as the candles burned low and sleep grew elusive, most medieval people learned to live with a little discomfort. They shared remedies, swapped stories, and did their best to keep hope and their skin intact. After all, in a world where every night was an adventure, physical and supernatural, a few bug bites were almost a comfort. At least they meant you were still alive to feel them. So tonight, if you catch yourself scratching at a phantom itch, maybe smile and remember some troubles are truly timeless. And sometimes surviving the night is a victory all its own.
You roll over, desperate for sleep, but the candle you left burning has gutted out, leaving the room thick with shadows. The darkness isn't just empty, it's alive, shifting and flickering with shapes your tired mind tries to explain.
In the Middle Ages, shadows were never just shadows. They were warnings, omens, and sometimes the stage for your wildest fears. With every nightfall, the line between the real and the imagined grew wonderfully, terrifyingly thin. Mainstream historical fact: before gas lamps or electricity, medieval nights were almost unimaginably dark. Most homes relied on a single candle, an oil lamp, or if you were lucky, a small hearth fire. The rest of the house, corners, rafters, and doorways, was a realm of shifting gloom. For children and adults alike, the flicker of a dying flame could turn a coat on a hook into a lurking stranger, or a pile of laundry into something far less mundane. There's a reason so many medieval tales start with "on a dark and stormy night." Shadows were more than simple absence of light. They could be omens. Quirky detail: in parts of rural England, it was believed that if your shadow moved independently in candlelight, you'd be haunted by bad dreams. In Italy, a wandering shadow was a sign that a family member was in danger, prompting quick prayers and even the occasional dash outside to find the missing soul and call it home. Shadows on the wall weren't just your imagination. They were your ancestors, your worries, or the stray thoughts of someone wishing you ill. Historians still argue whether medieval folk were more superstitious about darkness because of religion, folk memory, or the plain old terror of being unable to see. Either way, the rituals surrounding bedtime shadows were elaborate. Some households left a candle burning low, not for light, but to anchor the soul and keep evil spirits from gathering. Others drew symbols on doors and windows, hoping to block shadows from creeping inside. In Germany, a bowl of water was sometimes set in the moonbeam's path, so spirits would see their own reflection and be frightened off. But for all their fear, people also made peace with the darkness in small, practical ways. Families gathered close, huddling together in the single patch of lamplight to share stories. Children learned to listen for the difference between ordinary creaks and something more sinister. Light joke: if you're ever accused of talking to yourself at night, just say you're negotiating with the shadows. The business of falling asleep in darkness gave rise to countless little habits. Some people avoided looking directly at corners before bed, believing shadows hid watching eyes. Others would count heartbeats or recite psalms until they felt drowsy, all the while keeping their face turned away from the darkest parts of the room. There's a lovely old superstition that if you can catch your own shadow smiling in the firelight, you'll have pleasant dreams though, as you might imagine. Catching a smiling shadow is easier said than done. And then there's the business of candle magic. In some villages, how your candle behaved at bedtime could reveal your fortune. A flame that burned steady promised a peaceful night. One that sputtered or split warned of unrest. If your candle went out all by itself, you'd want to relight it quickly, or at least mutter a protective rhyme. Candle bright, protect my sight, keep all spirits out of night. There's something comforting about believing a bit of wax and wick can hold the darkness at bay. Artists, poets, and dreamers sometimes found inspiration in these shadowy nights. Many a medieval legend was born from the half-waking visions of a child staring at the dancing figures on the wall. Adults, too, told tales of shadows that whispered secrets, or carried messages from the other side. Historians still debate whether these nighttime visions were truly supernatural, or simply the result of a brain eager to make sense of what it couldn't see. Sometimes the shadows weren't just ominous, they could be playful, or even protective. Grandmothers told children that shadow cats chased away the nightmares, curling up at the foot of the bed to purr until dawn. Some families made shadow puppets, transforming monsters into dancing bunnies and birds, turning fear into laughter, and perhaps into better dreams. As night deepens, the house seems to shrink, the world reduced to a small circle of warmth and flickering light. You listen to the silence, punctuated only by your breathing, and the odd crackle from the dying fire. Shadows stretch across the floor, but they can't quite reach you, not while you're tucked safely beneath your blanket, heart beating a steady, familiar rhythm. So tonight, as you close your eyes, let the shadows do their dance. Picture yourself in that medieval cottage, the candles glow warm on your face, stories swirling through the darkness like gentle ghosts. Even in the deepest night, the light we carry, whether from a candle or a memory, is sometimes enough to keep the worst shadows at bay. Somewhere in the distance, a cock crows faintly, too early, or perhaps not at all. You shift under your blanket, and for a moment you forget whether you're sleeping in a peasant's crowded cottage, or the high stone chambers of a noble house. After all, even royalty weren't immune to troubled sleep, and their anxieties were dressed in silk and superstition. If you think palace walls kept out the night's unease, think again. Noble beds were as much a battleground for strange rituals and restless worries as any barn or roadside inn. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval nobles took sleep seriously, but their solutions to sleepless nights were often as bizarre and superstitious as those of the common folk. Palaces were built with thick stone walls, heavy tapestries, and massive canopied beds designed to keep out the cold and the spirits alike. Great four-posters with intricate carvings weren't just for show, they were thought to protect against drafts, gossip, and the wandering eyes of ghosts. Servants would close curtains tight, lay out scented herbs, and sometimes even bless the room before the lord or lady retired. Yet the higher you rose in society, the more sleep became a performance. Every noble had a routine, a cup of posset, warm milk spiced with honey, and perhaps a nip of wine, the recitation of family prayers, and the careful placement of charms. Noble women sometimes slept with a silver spoon or a piece of coral to keep evil dreams away. Knights returning from battle wore amulets sewn into their nightshirts, often inscribed with prayers for peaceful rest, and not so secretly for protection against anything their swords couldn't fend off. Quirky detail. In some royal households, there was a superstition that the monarch should never be the first or last to fall asleep, for fear that restless spirits would take advantage of the vulnerable moment. Enter the watchers' servants, whose job was to doze lightly near the royal bed, ready to rouse the sleeper if anything seemed amiss.
If the king or queen awoke troubled, a priest was summoned to bless the bed, and sometimes the whole room was rearranged for luck. Historians still argue whether this was genuine belief, or just an excuse for the most coveted or dreaded servant to gig in the castle. Even dreams in royal chambers could be a matter of state.
A king's nightmare might prompt a council meeting, a change in policy, or at least a day spent in penance and prayer. Queenly dreams could be interpreted as omens for children, harvests, or wars to come. It's said that Henry I of France once ordered an entire room repainted after a series of unsettling dreams. Light joke. Imagine trying to bill your boss for emergency nightmare redecorating in the 21st century. But superstitions didn't stop at the royal bedroom door. Castles were filled with hidden nooks and priest holes, sometimes built specifically for sleeping off curses or nightmares. Guests brought their own charms and rituals. An unlucky visitor who suffered a bad dream could spark a frenzy of rearranging furniture, burning incense, or fetching water from a holy well. If you thought medieval hospitality meant a good night's sleep, you might be surprised to find yourself on a bed already stuffed with lavender, rosemary, and occasionally a hidden horseshoe. And of course, with great power came great paranoia. Noble families were ever wary of curses cast by rivals. Some rulers travelled with their own bed tester, a servant tasked with lying in the bed first, in case it had been hexed or poisoned. Sleep well, Sir Percival, and if you wake up, bitten by fleas or feeling cursed, please don't tell the king. Historians still debate whether these noble rituals did much more than provide a sense of control in a life full of dangers, both seen and unseen, but there's a certain comfort in knowing that, for all their gold and grandeur, medieval nobles lost as much sleep to fears of the dark as any field hand or shepherd. In rare moments of calm, though, the great bedchambers could become places of gentle magic. Children were brought to the royal bed for lullabies, sung in half a dozen languages, with nurses and nannies reciting ancient stories to keep nightmares away. Great lords told tales of ancestors who'd seen off spirits, while queens confided secrets to their closest ladies-in-waiting, all bathed in the hush of candlelight and the soft rustle of silks. So, whether you find yourself tossing in a peasant's hayloft, or beneath a gilded canopy, remember that fear of the night plays no favourites. The same moon peeks through every shutter, and every sleeper, noble or not, clings to their own rituals, hoping for dreams that bring more comfort than worry. Tonight, if your own bedtime routine seems a little quirky, or you find yourself rearranging the pillows for the 100th time, take heart. You're following in royal footsteps, fighting the good fight against whatever might haunt the midnight hours. As night returns, the village and the castle both slip into uneasy quiet, but outside, watchful eyes never close. In the winding streets and lonely squares, the night watchmen begin their rounds, boots echoing on cobblestones. The official guardians of the sleeping world, these sleep police weren't just there to keep thieves and mischief at bay.
They were the thin, flickering line between the world of dreams and the unpredictable threats that thrived in medieval darkness.
Mainstream historical fact. Medieval towns and even some rural villages organised night watches, groups of men and occasionally tough-minded women tasked with keeping order from dusk till dawn. Armed with lanterns, wooden rattles, and sometimes small bells, these watchmen called out the hours, patrolled alleyways, and checked. Their presence helped protect against burglars and fires, but also reassured nervous residents that someone was awake, watching, and most importantly, ready to shout a warning if trouble arose. But the job wasn't just about brute vigilance. The night was home to more than thieves. It was also a time for night walkers, those who wandered for innocent or suspicious reasons. Anyone caught out after curfew risked being questioned, escorted home, or, if unlucky, dragged to the town jail. Why such suspicion? Medieval superstition taught that those who wandered after dark were either up to no good, or in the grip of forces best left alone. Historians still argue whether curfews were enforced for public safety, or to discourage the spread of gossip, witchcraft, or even night terrors blamed on roaming spirits. Quirky detail, some night watchmen carried not only weapons, but also odd little charms, tiny bells, sprigs of rowan, even little bread rolls to appease any spirits they might encounter. In parts of Germany, watchmen were known to recite protective rhymes as they patrolled, believed to confuse witches or demons hiding in the shadows. If a house seemed particularly troubled, strange noises, crying children, or too many nightmares, the night watch would sometimes stop and say a prayer at the doorstep. Did it help? Who's to say, but it made everyone feel better. The watchmen themselves had to be wary of suspicion. Night patrol was not a glamorous job. You might be accused of colluding with the very spirits you were meant to scare off, or blamed for bringing bad luck to a household you'd visited.
Sometimes the townsfolk would pay the watchman in bread, beer, or a few coppers, not just for protection, but for silence about any secret seen on his rounds. And woe to the sleepwalker or restless insomniac, caught outdoors.
More than one tale survives of an innocent wanderer mistaken for a witch or ghost, chased back inside by nervous watchmen or startled neighbours. There are stories, sometimes comic, sometimes tragic, of night watchmen following their own shadows, convinced they'd glimpsed the infamous black dog of legend or the glowing eyes of a revenant. Light joke. What's the difference between a medieval ghost and a sleep-deprived watchman? The ghost is better dressed. Curfews were real, and sometimes harsh. Bells rang at sunset to signal the shutting of the gates. All fires, except the main hearth, had to be extinguished, and street traffic died down to nothing. Only the bravest, or the most desperate, ventured out, hoping the watchman was in a good mood. Children grew up, learning to listen for the patrol's calls. 9 o'clock, and all is well, or the ominous beware the night, echoing down the lane. In some towns, watchmen doubled as healers or exorcists, carrying holy water or crosses for particularly unlucky homes. A family plagued by sleepless nights might call for a midnight blessing from the watch, hoping a quick sprinkle at the threshold would end their troubles. Historians still debate how much of the watchman's job was security, and how much was communal therapy for a society haunted by both real and imagined threats. Despite the dangers, watchmen sometimes injected humour into their lonely work. A favourite prank was to tell children that night spirits would collect wandering souls and deliver them to the baker to be turned into loaves by sunrise. Did it keep kids indoors, usually? Did it give them weird dreams? Absolutely. And as with so much in medieval life, the rules could change overnight. Festivals or holy days sometimes suspended the curfew, filling the streets with music and laughter. But as soon as the revelry died down, the old anxieties crept back, and the watchmen returned to their solemn, lantern-lit patrols, muttering their rhymes and scanning the darkness for signs of trouble. So next time you hear footsteps outside at night, or imagine a voice calling through the darkness, remember, for centuries, entire communities relied on those nightly guardians to keep sleep's delicate peace. Even today, our habit of checking the locks and glancing out the window before bed is just a quieter echo of the old tradition.
In the end, sleep is always a little safer when you know someone's watching, just in case the night gets ideas of its own. The night deepens, and you can smell the faint earthy tang of dried herbs wafting from a corner of the room.
If there's one thing medieval sleepers trusted nearly as much as prayers and charms, it was the secret knowledge of the plant world. Herbal lore handed down in kitchens, gardens, and apothecaries, from sweet-scented sachets tucked under pillows to mysterious potions brewed over glowing embers. Plant remedies for sleep were as common as the stars overhead, and sometimes just as mysterious.
Mainstream historical fact. Medieval herbalists, monks and wise women catalogued hundreds of plants with supposed sleep-inducing powers. Manuals like Hildegard of Bingen's Physica and the Herbarium of Apuleius listed recipes for teas, tinctures and sleep pillows, blending science, superstition, and a dash of wishful thinking.
The use of herbs for sleep crossed class lines. Everyone from peasants to nobles reached for a bit of lavender, chamomile or hops to chase away the night's anxieties. Let's picture you, wide awake and desperate for rest, watching your mother bundle sprigs of lavender and rosemary into a little linen pouch. She tucks it near your pillow, murmuring the old rhyme, "Lavender blue, rosemary true, bring me dreams and sleep anew." You inhale, hoping the scent will coax you into a gentler night. In other homes, someone brews a strong tea of valerian root, bitter and pungent, but famed for its drowsy effect. Mugwort is another favourite, believed to invite prophetic dreams, or, if overused, Dreams so wild you'll wake with stories worth a week's gossip. Quirky detail. In some parts of France, sleep apples, not real apples, but little balls of dried herbs and beeswax, were placed under mattresses. When the herbal scents faded, it was time for a new batch, a small but comforting bit of household ritual. In Scandinavia, juniper branches were tucked under beds to ward off both spirits and fleas. If you wanted a dreamless night, the local healer might slip poppy seeds into your milk, or lay a sprig of rue across your chest. The apothecary's shelf was a jumble of dried roots, pungent leaves, and mysterious bottles labelled with Latin names and dire warnings. Some concoctions worked by gentle suggestion, others by sheer pharmacological force. Opium, derived from poppies, made occasional and dangerous appearances in wealthier homes. Its use was risky, and legends grew of those who slept too deeply and woke changed. Historians still argue how widespread such potent remedies were, and whether most sleepers truly sought oblivion, or simply a little peace. Plant lore wasn't all soothing, though. Some herbs were double-edged. Belladonna, deadly nightshade, was rumoured to bring on sleep, but at the cost of vivid, sometimes terrifying visions. Bandrick, with its gnarled, human-like root, was an apothecary's prize, and a superstitious nightmare. Pulled from the earth with elaborate rituals, sometimes involving dogs and earplugs, it was believed to enhance dreams, cure nightmares, and maybe even summon spirits. If you find yourself craving adventure, just ask for a mandrake root at your local herbalist, then duck for cover. Families often grew their own sleep herbs. Garden plots and window boxes were packed with chamomile, rue, and marjoram. Children learned early to identify the plants, and in some places the first job of the evening was to gather a handful for the family's night brew. Some villages had dream gardens, special plots set aside for the cultivation of herbs associated with restful sleep and happy dreams. Light joke: the surest way to lose a night's sleep, accidentally drinking your neighbour's hangover cure instead of your own nightcap. Preparation was part science, part ceremony. Healers recited blessings over their potions. Mothers hummed lullabies while stuffing herb pillows. In noble houses, scented sashes were stitched into the seams of linen and hung from the canopies of great beds. In monasteries, monks brewed calming draughts for restless brothers, sometimes spiked with honey, sometimes with a sly dash of ale. Yet for all their effort, medieval folk knew there were limits. Not every night could be tamed by herbs and lullabies. Historians still debate whether these rituals truly worked or were simply a way to claim a sense of control over the dark's uncertainties. But when a cup of warm, herbed milk finally lulled you to sleep, it hardly mattered whether the magic was real or imagined. Tonight, if you catch the scent of lavender, chamomile, or even a trace of mint drifting from your pillow, let it remind you of all those centuries of sleepless dreamers and determined caretakers. Sometimes the gentlest things, leaves, flowers, a whispered rhyme, are the best shield against the monsters, real or imagined, that roam the night. As another dusk creeps in, a chill lingers in the air. Tonight feels different. Maybe it's the turn of the season, the subtle shift that sent villagers and nobles alike bustling with new bedtime rituals. In the medieval world, sleep was never just a nightly routine. It changed with the calendar, blossoming and fading with the wheel of the year. Solstices, harvests, feast days, and fasts brought their own shadows and superstitions, and what you did before bed in December was a world away from your habits in high summer. Mainstream historical fact: medieval people divided the year with a patchwork of religious holidays, agricultural milestones, and pagan festivals that had never quite faded. Each season brought its own customs, many centered around sleep and protection. At midwinter,
Families told tales of the wild hunt ghostly riders, sweeping through the sky, snatching up those caught outdoors. On these long haunted nights, people double-checked their doors, placed iron implements at windows, and said extra prayers before bed. Nobody wanted to be whisked away before morning. Summer brought its own sleep troubles. Longer days meant late-night labour, and sometimes sleeping outdoors in barns or under trees. There were warnings about the dangers of falling asleep under the open sky. Mischievous fairies, night air filled with chills, and the risk of waking with your dreams stolen by passing spirits. Quirky detail. In some English villages, it was said that falling asleep in the midsummer twilight could lead to your soul wandering, returning only at dawn, with wild tales and tangled hair. The only remedy was a cup of honeyed ale and a good brushing. Feast days and church holidays provided excuses for special bedtime rituals. On the eve of St. Agnes, young women scattered grains of wheat on their pillows to dream of their future husbands. At Candlemas, candles blessed by the priest were left burning safely until dawn, believed to keep away all manner of evil for the rest of the year. And every major festival, from Christmas to Michaelmas, was met with a flurry of protective charms, new herbs tucked into the bedding, shoes rearranged for luck, and a ritual sweep of the hearth to send last year's misfortunes up the chimney. Winter, especially, was a season of deep superstitions. The longest nights demanded extra effort. Windows shuttered against spirits, beds pulled close to the fire, and special loaves baked for St. Lucy's Day, each slice eaten in bed for vision and safety. Historians still argue whether these traditions were really about supernatural threats or just clever ways to bring a little hope and order to the coldest months. In spring, the first sleep after planting the fields was watched with extra care. Bad dreams were a warning that the seeds might fail. Farmers sprinkled holy water over their children's beds, hoping for a peaceful night and a bountiful harvest. Light joke, in some places, a single sneeze before bed in early spring was said to predict whether you'd wake up rich or just with a runny nose. The pattern of sleep itself changed with the season. In the depths of winter, people often slept in two phases. An early sleep, followed by an hour or two of wakefulness, and then a second sleep until dawn. During that midnight break, families might share stories, say prayers, or even slip outside to check on animals. The liminal hour was thought to be charged with magic, perfect for interpreting dreams or seeking advice from ancestors, as long as you remembered to return before the wild hunt found you. Children were taught seasonal sleep rules almost before they could talk. Don't look out the window at the Yule moon. Mothers would warn, or the Christmas spirits will tangle your hair. On harvest nights, young ones would hang small dolls in the rafters to keep nightmares at bay, each stitched with a wish for luck and good weather. Even noble courts indulged in seasonal sleep pageantry. Royal bedrooms changed linens with the equinox, swapping light, floral sachets for heavy resinous herbs as the night drew in. Some courts held midnight feasts during festivals, breaking up sleep on purpose to mark the turning of the year. Whether the nobles were truly superstitious or simply loved an excuse for a midnight snack is still up for debate. As the year wheels round, you begin to sense the cycle in your own bones, the restless light of summer, the deep dreams of winter, the hopeful anxiety of spring, the weary gratitude of autumn. Each season's sleep is woven with memories, rituals, and the quiet, unspoken hope that you'll wake with the sun and find the world unchanged. So tonight, as you settle beneath your blanket, you might give a thought to the old customs. A sprig of something sweet, a whispered wish for safety, a glance at the moon to see what kind of dreams it might bring. Sleep, in every season, is never just sleep. It's a dialogue with the world outside, a ritual woven through with the passing of time. As the seasons roll on, you grow used to the night's rhythm, the rise and fall of worries, charms, and rituals. But every now and then, your sleep takes on a stranger,
more mysterious tone, you wake from dreams so vivid, they feel like messages. The medieval world brimmed with belief that the boundary between sleep and prophecy was thin indeed. Sometimes the night whispered secrets of the future, and everyone, noble and peasant, priest and skeptic, kept an ear out for omens in the dark.
Mainstream historical fact. Medieval chronicles are packed with tales of prophetic dreams, visions and night apparitions that foretold everything from harvests to royal births and wars. Kings consulted dream interpreters, monasteries kept records of monks' visions, and ordinary people quietly passed stories of miraculous nighttime warnings.
In an age where written news was rare, dreams became their own secret source of information, just cryptic enough to be endlessly debated over morning bread. Picture yourself waking from a dream so clear you can't shake it. Perhaps you see a field of red poppies, or a bridge crumbling into a rushing stream, or someone you know calling out your name from the mist. In the medieval imagination, these images were anything but random. They might be warnings, invitations, or even commands from God or the saints. The right interpretation could mean the difference between safety and disaster. If you dreamed of fire, did it mean coming danger or a purifying blessing? If you saw your own shadow walking ahead of you, was it a sign of long life or a warning to beware the next crossroads?
Quirky detail, in many villages, a person known for prophetic dreams, sometimes called a night seer, could become a local celebrity or just as easily, a figure of suspicion. Families would bring their children to these dreamers, hoping for hints about the coming year, or shun them, fearing the attention of spirits.
One famous tale from England tells of a milkmaid whose dream of a collapsing bridge prompted her entire village to take a different route, thus narrowly avoiding disaster. Of course, there were plenty of tales of prophets whose predictions missed the mark, leading to jokes about dream-inspired bad bread, or livestock that never appeared. Interpretation was a subtle art, blending scripture, folk wisdom, and a hefty dose of improvisation. Local priests might be consulted for particularly troubling visions, but so might the oldest grandmother or the wandering herbalist. Books like the Dream Book of Daniel offered lengthy indexes. To dream of rain means sorrow, to dream of bread, happiness. But if your dream was especially weird, say involving dancing cows or singing shoes, you'd just have to hope your interpreter had a good imagination.
Historians still argue whether these prophetic dreams were ever taken as literal truth, or whether they were simply one more way for anxious communities to make sense of unpredictable events. After all, in a world full of dangers and uncertainty, any hint of forewarning was seized upon, no matter how strange the source.
Nighttime wasn't just for dream omens. People also believed in night whispers, soft, half-heard voices carrying warnings or advice. If you woke to the sound of someone calling your name, it could mean a message from a deceased relative, a nearby danger, or a spirit seeking your attention. A quick prayer or a candle lit in the darkness was the typical response. Just in case, some even left a bowl of water by the door, so spirits could deliver their messages and leave without lingering. If you had a particularly vivid dream, custom demanded you share it by the next sunrise at the breakfast table in the fields or during morning prayers. Failing to recount a prophetic dream could bring bad luck, or so it was whispered. The telling itself was sometimes enough to banish a nightmare, or to make a good omen come true. Dreams and visions often made their way into art, music, and folk tales. Some of the era's most beloved saints were believed to have received their divine callings in dreams. Joan of Arc, for instance, famously claimed to have been visited by saints and angels as she slept. Entire pilgrimages were inspired by such visions, as hopeful or desperate souls sought out the places shown to them in the night. Light joke: if you ever wanted to get out of chores, a well-timed prophetic dream about urgent matters in the next village might just do the trick, assuming your family was superstitious or simply looking for an excuse for a day off. Yet, for all the fear and awe these dreams inspired, most people simply lived with the uncertainty, tucking their visions away alongside the rest of their nighttime worries. Maybe your dream meant something, maybe it didn't. But as you lay in the darkness, the thought that the universe might be speaking, if only in riddles, was a comfort in itself. So tonight, listen for those night whispers and pay attention to your dream.
You never know what old secret or gentle warning might be waiting just beyond the veil of sleep. Some nights, even after you've survived spirits, shadows, rituals, bedbugs, bad dreams, and the moon's meddling, you still find yourself lying awake, pondering the strangeness of it all.
Why do so many old superstitions still haunt the edge of our sleep? Maybe it's because, deep down, the ancient fears and bedtime beliefs of medieval folk still curl up beside us, whispering caution, comfort, or a wry joke as we close our eyes. Even now, in a world lit by LEDs and tamed by technology, sleep remains mysterious, a nightly surrender filled with hopes, anxieties, and echoes of a time when the dark could not be banished by the flip of a switch. Mainstream historical fact: superstitions about sleep did not vanish with the coming of the modern age. Many of the little rituals and beliefs from the Middle Ages survive, sometimes unrecognized in how we say sweet dreams, check the locks, or tiptoe past creaking doors. The idea that sleep is dangerous, or that the soul wanders, or that nightmares are more than just brain static, endures in language, in lullabies, in stories whispered from parent to child. Think about it, we still place faith in lucky pajamas, favourite pillows, and bedtime routines that must be performed just so. Quirky detail: the act of knocking on wood for luck traces back to even older customs, and the childhood tradition of monster checks under the bed is just a modern echo of older salt circles and iron charms. The dreams that wake us in the night, the heaviness in the air before a storm, the comfort of sleeping close to others, these are all little relics of a world where sleep was something wild, risky and sacred. Historians still argue over whether we're truly less superstitious than our ancestors, or just better at hiding it behind science and routine. Perhaps beneath all the layers of modernity, the old fears never really left. Instead, they adapted. The bogeymen and mares traded places with anxieties about alarms, deadlines, or the blue glow of our screens. Even our lullabies, our nighttime prayers, our jokes about not surviving Mondays, contain more than a trace of medieval sleep wisdom. Tonight, as you turn off your lamp and settle beneath the blanket, you're not just ending a day, you're participating in a ritual as old as humanity. Your mind races through its bedtime litany, windows locked, phones plugged in, a glass of water within reach. Maybe you recite a favourite phrase, smooth out the sheets, or listen to a calming story. Hello there. These are more than quirks, they're your own private version of the old communal magic. You glance at the shadows on the wall, remember the stories of spirits and watchmen, herbs and holy water. Perhaps you give your pillow a final fluff just in case, and hope for the best. Whether you drift off into peaceful dreams, or wrestle with a restless mind, you're not alone. There's a comfort in knowing that, for all our progress, the night is still full of the same mysteries, fears, and gentle hopes as it ever was. So, as you close your eyes tonight, let the ancient myths and rituals keep you company. Feel the thought connecting you to all those who came before, peasants, nobles, saints, and skeptics, each of them navigating the strange, slippery realm of sleep with a mix of fear, humour, and stubborn resilience. Maybe, just maybe, the enduring power of sleep myths isn't in the fear, but in the hope that tomorrow's dawn will find us safe, well rested, and just a little bit wiser. And if you wake in the darkness, heart pounding, don't be afraid. Just remember the oldest story of all is that the night always ends, and morning always comes. And now, as your breath softens, and the world grows distant, let your mind drift gently, like a leaf on a slow river. The ancient whispers fade,
replaced by the warmth of your own quiet room, the steady rise and fall of your chest, the hush that settles after a long winding story. Every superstition, every shadow, every distant bell and herbal charm slips further away, dissolving into the dark. There's nothing left to fear. The night is just a night again. Safe and ordinary, a velvet blanket to wrap around your tired mind. Let your thoughts slow, each one softer than the last. Feel the comfort of being here, right now, knowing that the old fears cannot reach you. The bed beneath you is solid, the air around you gentle and calm. The rituals and myths of ages past become gentle background music, far-off echoes, lulling you deeper. You are safe, you are warm, and nothing waits for you but a long, healing sleep. If a stray worry tries to catch your attention, let it drift away like a feather in the breeze. This is your time to rest. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere to be, no spirits, no omens, just the peace of the present moment. The darkness has become a friend, wrapping you in calm and stillness. Let yourself grow heavier, softer, as if sinking into a cloud. Sleep welcomes you now, with open arms, as it has welcomed countless dreamers before.
Breathe in peace. Breathe out everything else. Let the hush of history cradle you into the gentlest dreams.
Good night.